Upon landing, this passenger disregarded the flight crew's order to honor a fallen soldier, stating loudly, "I couldn't care less about it." Little did he know that the person behind him would instantly make him regret uttering such a statement. "Sir, you have to wait." The flight attendant's voice cut through the chaos as the man, tall and rugged, pushed his way to the front of the aisle. "Move," he snapped. But she stood her ground, blocking his path with a firmness that matched his aggression. "This is a sensitive moment. We need to let the fallen soldier be escorted off first." The tension in the cabin thickened as the plane taxied to the gate, and the gravity of the situation was lost on those desperate to leave. As the pilot's voice from the transmitter faded away, the flight attendants reiterated the pilot's request, their voices firm but respectful. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We have a fallen soldier on board. A fallen airman." The fallen airman's escort, two somber-faced military officers, headed for the door, and that was when things began to take a wild turn. In a matter of seconds, most of the passengers got on their feet and followed suit, ignoring the plea to remain seated. Among them was a man who had been fidgeting in his seat since takeoff from Phoenix. The man was tall, had a rugged jawline, and appeared to be in his late 40s. He stood at the forefront of the aisle, waiting next in line behind the fallen airman's escort to disembark. However, before he could rush out, a flight attendant, visibly upset, stopped him in his tracks. "You have to wait, sir," she said, firmly and politely. A hint of irritation flashed across his face as he stood face to face with the petite stewardess. That afternoon, as he stood before the door, he glanced around, seemingly annoyed that he was now the object of frustration for the impatient passengers who pushed against him. Irate, he shot a glare at the stewardess, as if hoping it would scare her off and give him room to pass. But she remained undeterred, returning his glare with the same intensity while repeating her order to stay seated. "I couldn't care less, honestly," the man hissed at the lady, drawing a few disapproving glances from the passengers who caught it. He didn't notice the attention he had unwittingly drawn to himself, especially from a certain fellow who sat behind him. And, for the record, he didn't seem to care. All he wanted was to walk out of the plane. He had no idea that doing so would lead to a moment that would forever change his life. It was the summer of 2017, and the plane was bound for Detroit, carrying a precious cargo, the body of Sergeant Andrew Taylor, an airman who was being transported back to his home in Michigan. As the passengers settled into their seats, the pilot's voice resounded over the intercom, his tone soft and somber. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special passenger on board today. We're honored to be transporting the remains of Sergeant Andrew Taylor, who made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. We ask that you all remain respectful and silent during the flight." Sergeant Andrew Taylor was an airman stationed at Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix. He was born in Lansing, Michigan, and served in the U.S. Air Force for 10 years, until he passed away at the age of 28. His family was working on taking him home to Michigan so they could finish up the final funeral preparations when unexpected drama was forming in the distance. It's not always the case that fallen soldiers are transported in grand style by cargo or Delta Force planes, as depicted in movies. They can sometimes be flown home on regular commercial planes with people on board. This was precisely the case for the late sergeant. His family, which consisted of his mother, siblings, and children, Adriana and Aiden, had been waiting for this moment for weeks, their hearts heavy with grief. They had said their goodbyes at the military base, surrounded by Sergeant Taylor's fellow soldiers, who blew taps for the last time in his honor. Now, through this trip, they were one step closer to laying their beloved Andrew to rest. Sergeant Andrew Taylor was surrounded by love and respect from his colleagues, family, and the flight crew, who sought to ensure a solemn atmosphere on the flight. However, not all passengers shared this reverence. Mr. Johnson, seated in 17C, was notably irritated by the repeated reminders to maintain decorum for the fallen soldier's sake. Eager to reach his destination, he dismissed the pilot's messages as unnecessary and grumbled under his breath about the situation. Martha, a stewardess, noticed his irritation. Despite catching her subtle look of annoyance, Mr. Johnson chose to ignore it, preferring to avoid any confrontation during the 4-hour flight. As the flight progressed, the pilot and crew continued to remind passengers to stay seated upon landing, so Sergeant Taylor's body could be removed with respect. Johnson's discomfort with these reminders was evident, drawing attention from those around him. However, as Martha, who had been keeping a watchful eye on him, sensed his displeasure from a mile away, quickly, she approached him with a warm smile, eager to determine the source of his discomfort. True to his arrogant self, Mr. Johnson wasted no time in questioning the reason for the constant reminders, citing them as too much and unnecessary. The remark came off as a slight slap to Martha, yet she fought the urge to let annoyance mask her face. "Sir, I understand it may seem repetitive, but we have a lot of passengers on board who may not be paying attention," she explained, gesturing towards some passengers who were busy with magazines and others who were either watching movies or laughing at entertaining content on their phones. "We're only trying to create a respectful atmosphere for the family of Sergeant Taylor." Martha hoped her words were sensible enough to appeal to the inconsiderate man, but to her surprise, they didn't seem to have any effect on him. If anything, it only pushed him to utter more insensitive statements. Scoffing at her statement, the man stated that he did not see the point of such an extended gesture. After all, nobody was going to get up from their seats to dance or cheer suddenly. "It's a long trip. We can't keep hearing this on and on, you know," he concluded, his eyes not betraying the irritation that laced his words. Martha's smile faltered, her mind reeling from what she had just heard. She took a few calming breaths to control herself, careful not to talk or act rashly that afternoon. Once she regained control of her emotions, Martha responded politely but firmly to Mr. Johnson, reminding him of the need for basic courtesy and to keep the peace during the flight. Although the exchange irritated Mr. Johnson, he reluctantly agreed to comply. The flight crew reiterated the reminder to maintain decorum 4 times, particularly as the tension on the plane increased. When the 4-hour flight finally landed, Martha blocked Mr. Johnson from disembarking, breaking protocol to ensure he remained respectful. Passengers were repeatedly instructed to wait until Sergeant Andrew Taylor's body was respectfully removed from the aircraft. However, Martha found herself trying to manage an arrogant Mr. Johnson and other insensitive passengers. Mr. Johnson dismissed the significance of the situation, claiming he didn't care, which irritated Martha. Observing similar disapproval from other passengers, Martha realized she was losing control over the increasingly agitated crowd and reluctantly stepped aside to avoid escalating the situation further. Mr. Johnson smirked, pleased by her retreat, unaware that his insensitive remarks had caught the attention of Ken Fitzgerald, a retired airman. Fitzgerald, who had remained respectful, couldn't let the behavior go unchallenged and called out to Mr. Johnson, but was ignored. As Mr. Johnson exited the plane, Fitzgerald was shocked by the disregard shown by him and other passengers, even as Sergeant Taylor's family mourned. Angered, Fitzgerald resolved to make sure Mr. Johnson and others understood the importance of showing respect to Sergeant Taylor and his grieving family. Fitzgerald wasn't seeking revenge, but aimed to educate. He recorded the scene and shared the clip online, expressing his disappointment at the passengers' behavior. His post quickly went viral, catching the attention of news outlets and bloggers, who decried the lack of respect shown by the passengers. In the aftermath, a well-known company, for which Mr. Johnson was on a business trip, reviewed the incident. They revoked his frequent flyer privileges and required him to attend sensitivity training, with severe consequences for non-compliance. Despite the initial outrage, there was a silver lining. Sergeant Taylor's family received immense support from those who sympathized with them. "I was saddened by the disrespect shown, but the love and support my brother's family has received is overwhelming," said Sergeant Taylor's sister, Tiffany Dobson. "This incident serves as a reminder. Always respect the deceased and honor fallen soldiers who have sacrificed for our freedom. Refrain from making insensitive remarks, especially when others are mourning."